So when we took the Pad B over from the shuttle program, when we started to modify it for the Constellation program at the time, this is in the 2007 timeframe, one of the key things in this transition was to preserve the historical artifacts. It is clearly a national landmark. So one of the things we had to go through and assess everything and determine whether it needed to be preserved or whether or not we could demolish it. At the time, because Pad A was still being used for shuttle, a lot of the things were assessed as there was already one over at Pad A, so we didn't necessarily need to keep the one at Pad B. However, we did keep a lot of the major components. We worked with the Visitor Center to preserve those here, the KSC Visitor Center. And then there were a lot of other things that were offered up to institutions and schools all throughout the country, and individuals could apply to take some of these components so they could have a piece of this history. During that process, we found, we saved the crew access arm. We saved we call the beanie cap. If you think of the shuttle program and the arm that would come over on top of the large orange tank, and it was one of the one of the last things to move out of place before launch. That was saved, and that was sent over to the Visitor Center. We saved some of the emergency egress baskets. That was the slide wire baskets that would be used by astronauts in the event of emergency. Were never used, but they were there. We saved some of those, and we have worked with our Visitor Center to preserve that. So we went through a lot of the different systems, and everything got assessed, whether or not it needed to be preserved. And those that we needed to stay here at Kennedy or at the Visitor Center, others went to universities and colleges, and other things just got demoed. One of the things that we did when we took over the pad was to open up the famous rubber room. Anyone that's familiar with the history of the pads, the emergency egress system under shuttle was slide wires, but under the Apollo program, there was actually a room underneath the pad surface. You would take a slide down the mobile launcher tower, and then they would go on a slide down into the pad surface, and there was a room suspended on springs. And this had been closed up, and it was kind of a urban legend, but it was real. We turned the lights on, we went in and we looked at it, and there it was. There's a circle of chairs, all the equipment that they would need to generate their breathing air, some water, all of the emergency systems. And so we worked with the Visitor Center and had all of that removed so that they could recreate that, or a section of that, at the Visitor Center, documented it with photographs and video, because it was such a big part of the history during the Apollo program, and so many people had heard of it, kind of the legends of it, and so we wanted to make sure we had that people could see it in the future. Unfortunately, because it was built back in the 60s, there are some very nasty building materials that were used, some asbestos, so we have it closed off, keeping people away from there to keep them safe. But we have the pictures and we can show people, so whenever they ask about the infamous rubber room, we can say, can't take you there, but I could show it to you. Those were some of the really fun things to do. It reminds you every day of where you're working, and that's one of the most amazing things about working here. You are literally, walking on the shoulders of giants and what they have done, and you can feel the energy out the pad and all that's been there. And when you go into a room like that, you can imagine what it was like, back in the 60s, early 70s, where they were training in those rooms, and really get appreciation for what they accomplished. There is a lot of history out of the pad, and when we think about everything that goes out there, there are a lot of stories about what has come. I've heard a lot of stories. I don't know which are true. So you hear a lot of different opinions, and one of my favorite is the slide wires that were there for shuttle were never used. Were never used during training, and I've heard different answers that only 2 people have wrote on them. One was Bolden. I've heard different stories of who the other one was. A lot of people will come out there and tour and say, oh yeah, my dad wrote on that. I hear that a lot. It seems like almost every tour group I take tells me that someone they know has wrote on that. But I don't know for sure. We don't have any documentation of who were the 2 people, if there were 2, that actually wrote on the slide wire system. The rubber room, the slide that goes into that room, there are a lot of fun stories about that never being used in training because of the injuries people sustained when they tried it. One was when they went down the slide was so fast that the zipper in the back of their suit burned them. kind of gave them a little bit of a burn, so they never did it. One was that they came down so fast that when they hit the end of it, they crushed their ankle, so no one was ever to use it. Again, I have never met anyone that went down the slide in the rubber room, but we've heard a lot of fun, interesting stories of that. There's a lot of stories of wildlife out there. Kennedy's on a national wildlife refuge, and I have seen my fair share of pictures of poisonous snakes. I've seen coyotes myself. I've seen non-poisonous snakes. I've seen bobcats. A lot of alligator stories. I keep waiting for one to walk into our office building that's right outside the gate. But we are constantly reminded every day that we are on a wildlife refuge, and that we are just borrowing this land from them. We have amazing wildlife, the gopher tortoises all around us. We keep our lights down at night for the sea turtles. So we are constantly reminded of who really lives here.